Hey everyone, welcome to Pod 30 in this FXS Lowrider Restoration Series. If you're first joining us, you could click on this link in the top right corner. It'll take you to a listing of all the videos. You could click on the first link, or whatever link you left off from, and continue from there. In our last video, we pulled out the rear axle and swapped out the low side chain tensioner, installed new bob fitting in the manifold for VOES, set up all the pieces and brackets on the head to secure the manifold, opened up the carb to re-inspect the jet sizes, change it out to a 72, unpacked the S&S Stealth Air Cleaner Kit, assembled all the components and the new hardware onto the engine, mounted the carb, as well as the throttle linkage, and then the new filter kit. And all this allowed for the installation of a filter with a filter cover that I wanted that didn't have the generic S&S filter cover. In this video, I'm going to start going through a checklist of remaining work for this bike. We can see here I have this ordered list in this book. I'm going to be checking these off as each task is completed. This may extend over multiple videos. I'm going to try working the list from back to front. This includes the rear axle and the brakes as we make our way forward. This also means setting up the chain tension and the wheel alignment and chain alignment properly. So we'll get the rear wheel in the air to get started. I'm going to spin it around here. We're going to see how the chain falls in the sprocket. I'm going to do something different today. We're going to use a new product that I just got, and we're going to test it out and see how it works. Being mindful that also adjusting the alignment also adjusts the slack and vice versa. So this is what I picked up. It's a chain alignment tool, and the premise is simple enough to understand. So we're going to give this a shot. It is a simple piece of aluminum anodized with which a long rod is secured into it. I'm going to need to remove this chain guard. It will most likely be replaced. Mine is secured with a 1/4 inch hex in the rear, a 1/2 inch bolt in the front. Sounds like a shim dropped. This is nasty, so I will clean it because it will go back on till a new one arrives. And I'll take a moment now to clean all those hard to reach areas that were blocked by the chain guard. I'm going to take a base measurement of the chain slack. Should be a 1/2 inch deflection halfway between the sprockets. This one being a little loose, I'm going to turn it one flat on both sides just to shore it up. My recheck now shows 1/2 inch deflection is measured. I now want to get a good reference on the chain, like the master link, and rotate the entire chain, measuring to make sure that the slack is even and consistent so I don't have any loose spots or tight spots throughout the chain. Mine is good, it's consistent throughout, so I'm happy. Now we're going to line the wheel and sprocket to the transmission sprocket back and forth. I've installed the rod like this to get maximum length out of it. I'm going to be sure not to bump it as to bend it in any way. This flat over here will seat on the inside of the sprocket, so we'll lay it in. Trying to keep the rod somewhat parallel, though we could rotate the tire later if need be. We'll screw it down just to snug it, and there it is. It's difficult to get a camera to focus like this, but in the freeze frame we can see the rod is angling to the right off of the chain. We're going to need to adjust. As I adjust both in opposite directions to straighten the rod, I still need to check and make sure that the slack is correct when I do this. I'll admit that the camera does it no justice because you really need to be right behind the rod to see the reference point, but it's still pointing just a hair to the right. One more adjustment. Again, the slack is rechecked. I came off the tripod to get the best possible shot I could, showing it perfectly aligned. It's a little shaky. So now we'll start tightening down the axle. And this could remain on through the tightening process to ensure this didn't cause a shift. And I'm going to set my torque wrench to just about 70 foot-pounds. A breaker bar will secure the low side with a 1 1/4 socket. And the axle is now secure. After one more check, the tool is then removed, and the chrome cap covers will now be placed over the rear axle. I'm going to put these two shims back in the old chain guard. I'm going to put it on until the new one arrives because it clearly had clearance issues. I'm not going to deal with this right now. It's bent. I think this tool worked out pretty well, $11, and it made it very easy to align the chain. So I'll cross off the chain guard and the chain alignment. Now we got the rear brake bleed. We're going to jump right into the rear brakes. This system is .5. It's important to note that. I'll be using the pneumatic bleeder seen in my other videos. So I'll pop off the dust cap, put a 3/8 wrench right over the bleeder. We'll open up the reservoir up front here. Set up our vacuum line. And here's the whole system hanging and ready. And I'll pre-add brake fluid up to the level. Turn on the suction. Then I'll open up the bleeder. And I'll watch as it drains. I'll keep adding brake fluid. This will continue until all air has been purged from the system. Give the brakes a test. They're rock solid. This is a good setup now. Place the cover back on. Tighten everything down. And just give it one more test. Yeah, these brakes are good. Very happy with this. So I pull off the vacuum, pull off the wrench, put the dust cap back on, and we're done with this. And now I'll put on this sticker that's been missing from these brakes for God knows how long. And we'll mark off the rear brakes as done. Moving on. We're going to fill the transmission to level now. I have a special tool to open it. It's only partially filled, so I don't expect it to take the entire quart. I'm going to open this up. I'm using this 80W90 that I've always used, made for this 4-speed. Small funnel. 5mm will remove this level screw right here. Since it's on a lift, I'm setting the level of the bike with a level on the frame. Again, this transmission was partially filled. This is what I got left in the bottle. I'll let the level hole stop draining. I put the screw back in, and then I tighten it down. Now I'll remove all this stuff and close up the transmission. Check it off. On to the next thing. We got a special guest today. Mom's in town. Say hello, Ma.
Hi, Ma.
Mom's going to be tightening this nut here on the clutch arm. So this is an 11/16. Go ahead, Ma. Tighten that down. That's good enough. You're good.
Perfect.
Outstanding. Good job.
Thank you.
I'll show this real quick. I made a minor modification to the license plate bracket. I cut these grooves in here, and I'll show you why. The license plate used to sit up here almost what seemed an inch too high. It was very awkward. So I cut these grooves in. That would allow me to drop it, level it, and center it, instead of just drilling holes through the existing bracket. And here's how it came out. With washers on the back, you can't see any of the work. Perfectly leveled, perfectly centered, with the support on the top. That's done. We're going to move on to the front brakes now. High side front brake. We could see there's a problem here. Definite leak. We're going to have to get into this brake caliper and see what's going on. I've already broken tension on these 3/16 hex that secure it. I'll slide one out. The nuts are still in the back of the caliper, and we can see everything is just covered with brake fluid. Pull the other one out now too. As I pull off the caliper, I have a safety wire on standby to hold the caliper if I gotta walk away, so it's not hanging from the cable. Wow, this looks terrible. I'm going to tie it off for a sec so I can clean stuff up. Then we're going to remove the caliper with a 7/16 wrench. I've secured the brake line a little higher so it doesn't leak with that safety wire, and I'll cap it. There really wasn't much fluid left in the system. And I'm going to remove the safety wire. The caliper is now disconnected from the bike. As we take a look, there's really nothing wrong with the caliper. It's just leaking. The seal must be bad. We're going to have to take it apart. I'm going to bring it over to the vise so I could loosen the one bolt that secures the entire caliper together. That 5/8 bolt has been loosened on the vise, and now I'm just going to unscrew it. We'll bring it over to the bench and do it. With this bolt removed, everything is held together with pins, so we'll slide everything out, keeping all the components in the right order. We'll bring this side in the garage to remove the piston with air. We're going to wrap the caliper first to catch a mishap in case there is one. I'm going to just do a little bit of air just to see if it bumps out easy, and it does, so we know what we're dealing with. Just a tiny bit of air pressure should knock this right out, and there it is. Piston popped out. We'll clean all this up and bring it right back onto the bench. I don't see any problems with this piston, so we're going to reuse it. We're going to replace the seal, however. I'm going to pull off the old dust cap. And I'm going to pull out the old seal. Now I'm going to flip off the components on the other half of the caliper and clean them up and reassemble it and just put it off to the side. This is now ready for new seals and pads. Picked up a dual Caliper Rebuild kit. And of course I'll be working with .5. Now I'm going to lightly coat the seal with .5, as well as the inside of the race for the seal and the caliper. After that, I'm going to negotiate that seal into position within that race. Start working it in, and then I'll just work it around in a circle until it's fitting in there properly. I'll go around and inspect and make sure it's all sitting correctly. We see here in a 360-degree inspection of the seal sitting properly within the race. Only after making sure it's sitting properly will we continue. I wanted to try a minor change procedure here. This time, I put the dust cap on first. I wanted to see if it would seat easier doing it this way, so bear with me. I put the dust cap on and seated it within the race for the dust cap that we see here. Now it's all seated properly. Give it a little tug, make sure everything's fully seated. Now I'm going to take a little bit of .5 and I'm going to put it on the piston. Now I'm going to take the piston and I'm going to press it into the caliper. It should go right in as long as it's straight, no problem at all. Slowly pressing it in. And I blew just a couple of pounds of air in, again, to bring the piston up slightly. I wanted to see if it would seat properly into the notch in the caliper, which it did. I was just curious about that, and that's why I did that. So now I'm going to press the piston back down, having concluded that that method does work, except you do get a little bit of air in between that dust cap. That's the only thing about that. So I'm just going to push the air out as I press the piston back down. But it worked fine, that method. And I'm just going to press it all the way back down, seated in a position. Again, check it for air. And there we go. That caliper rebuild is done. With the rebuild now completed, the caliper can now be reassembled. I will want to test to make sure the leak has been fixed before I replace the brake pads. So we're going to leave these old brake pads in the system for now. These old brake pads will be reassembled as if they are new ones, so everything will receive the proper anti-seize on the shims and on the back of the pads as I slowly bring them around to the other side of the caliper. Then we'll turn this nut in here on the bench, and we'll use the ratchet to draw out the slack, and 45.5 foot-pounds on the vise. We'll tighten this down. This equipment has been all cleaned up. There's not a whole lot of thread on these to work with. I've spread out the brake pads as to put the caliper back on. And then these bolts will go through. I'll point out that they are not the same size. And the longer one is supposed to be on top. I've put in the shorter one. I'll figure this out very quickly, as when I put the nut on the back, I won't be able to secure it. But I was just actually looking for one to grab to hold the caliper on as I was looking through the camera, so I took it off and replaced it with the proper one. These are torqued to 10 foot-pounds each. I just do that by feel. Here's that brake line that I had held up and covered. Pretty much empty system at this point, but I'll now remove it from the safety wire and lower it down. I quickly connected it to the calipers with a paper towel in hand and then try to wipe up any residual brake fluid. I immediately tighten down that connection and clean up this entire area. I don't want to confuse any of that spilled fluid for a leak. I had opened up and cleaned out the reservoir It was in fact empty. There was just some crust in there. And I filled it up with .5, and I'm really slowly depressing and releasing the brake handle. I'm just trying to get fluid in the top of the system and through the lines before I begin my bleeding procedure, because there's no fluid in here, and I didn't bench bleed anything. So this is what I'm doing. I'm just slowly pushing it in about 3/4 of the way and then releasing. And I get about 2 or 3 reservoirs full of fluid doing it this way before I even begin the bleeding process. These are big bubbles. Eventually there's a point of diminishing returns where I push it and I can see liquid flowing, but I don't see bubbles coming up anymore. Obviously the handle's still spongy because there's air in the system, just not here on the top side, and it's going to be time to bleed them. Now I got my bleeding system all set up, got the wrench on the bleeding valve, open it up with the vacuum running. I'll close it and then I'll shut the vacuum. Disassemble everything and repeat this process on the other side. Here's the gasket that came out of the reservoir. And here's a gasket I had in storage that already had cracked with age. But I do have a new gasket, so I put that one in. I squeezed the front brakes now, and they feel nice and solid. They feel like they always did. So everything on the front brakes are now looking good. In pumping the front brakes, the piston closed up, and this caliper is now tight. With that, I can now cross off the front brake bleed from the list of things to do on the pre-run list. And that concludes this video and the first half of the checklist. I hope to conclude the checklist in the next video. I hope you found it enjoyable, entertaining, and informative. Do me a favor, hit that like button down below. It helps me out a lot when you do. And hit that subscribe button to be notified about more videos like this when they come out. When the next video comes out, a link will be posted in the top right-hand corner. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Would you like to reply?